I'm just struck by by your comment about hero leaders, and it's been my observation that public education focuses a lot on teachers in a sort of similar way. That we talk a lot about the few teachers who shouldn't be in the classroom, or we talk about the heroes who are unicorns who would succeed under virtually any circumstances. Right. And we're sort of ignoring, I think, the big group of people in the middle who are good, well-intentioned teachers who are maybe passionate about their work, but maybe not supported enough by the system. And I'm wondering if you see a similar thing in your organizations about how can we sort of help the mere mortals become great? How can we help good teachers do the hard job of education today? I'm wondering if you have any lessons from your organizations about how schools could do that.
Sure, I'll kick off on that. It's yes, have seen the relationship, the correlation. I think about it as really in the heart of performance management. And so as we take a look at, there's always those individuals who you're right, the unicorn, and it's amazing. Although that pack mule tends to get a lot of the assignments because they're so good at what they do, and at some point you're going to burn them out. And so there's always the bell curve, right? And then those who are maybe on the trailing edge of it. I think performance management and really, at our company, we're a young company. We're just into our second decade now. And performance management, and when we start talking about career pathing and succession planning, and I mean, truly trying to calibrate the talent, but not trying to calibrate the talent. It seems like we always spend time on the top and on the bottom, as opposed to what kind of tools, opportunities. The word that I love is access. And because access is real life experience, that to me, I know in my career, I started as a part-time customer service agent at a company here that was New York based. My home's Detroit, at New York Air. But I was provided access over time. Sometimes you have to fight for that access. But people in the mentoring that I received, I think about Gordon Bethune at Continental Airlines before coming over to JetBlue, that access was invaluable. So that's the kind of, I think at the heart of it, and I'll lateral the ball, but it's performance management and really trying to calibrate, but not trying to calibrate out. We spend a lot of time on, right, who's at the bottom, right, and again, at the top of the organization, but you're right, that sweet spot. It is the 80% in the middle of the organization. And it's really trying to invest in the toolkit because that could be the leader of tomorrow, of the organization, not just of the department.
Yeah, I would say very similar response, which is, it's really, in the same way a school needs everyone performing at top level, a company is the same. There are grades of performance, but it's really about recognizing and encouraging and mentoring those in that sort of middle space. You know who the leaders are, you know who the stars are, and you need to encourage that and give them more opportunities so that they can grow. But how do you take, regular performers and make them into stars, or encouraging them to keep going? You talked about reward, recognition, acknowledgement. All of that I think is critical. I was a teacher. I know what it was like to be in a classroom and feeling isolated, not wanting to feel isolated, but wanting to be part of a larger team when I was outside of the classroom. And I think that's very much what we do in our company, and I think that's what I've seen effective principals do in their schools.
So let me just add to that on. So part of, I think, what you're hearing is how do we build the systems around teachers to help them succeed? So if you think about a typical teacher, especially a new teacher that's going to a really tough school, oftentimes we don't give them the curriculum, we give them the big standards. Here's what you need to get to at the end of the year. Here's a 300-page textbook, go teach. That's insane if what we're trying to do is reduce variability and quality from one child to another and reduce it from one classroom to the next. This is not about eliminating the art of teaching, but it is elevating up the science of teaching. So we know, one of the things we know in education, we know how to teach kids how to read. Maybe not high school kids that are behind, but elementary kids that are struggling, a lot of strategies on how to do it. We don't do a very good job in education teaching teachers, elementary teachers, how to do it. Here's 4 different strategies. We can do better. we're getting better, and as we start to get clear on what we want students to know and be able to do, I think what we're starting to see districts to do, and this is why I say the systems and the district have a responsibility, is we're providing new teachers curriculum supports. We're not telling them on Tuesday be on page 6, but we're saying here's different ways to teach this important concept. Here's how you can do it in teams. Here's how you can share this responsibility. So the more we can build tools and systems and incentives, performance management around our teachers and principals, the more we can do. And that goes to one other piece. We have a debate in education about how much testing is, how much we have in the system and how much we should have. If we're a learning organization, if there's no assessment, there's no way to know if learning happens. So we need to have an honest conversation about how do we help teachers have appropriate assessments to know how my kids are doing. And as a principal, how is it across my building? And if we can have that honest conversation and solid tools on how we teach the kids and how we assess them, I think principals and teachers will be much more effective. So the mere mortals, as you say, can actually do amazing things.
That's great.
What concerns me, first of all, I'm enjoying everyone and the very valuable insights. What concerns me is all of this is for naught if we don't understand that they developmentally, children develop differently. They're not all the same. So this emphasis on testing is really wrong-headed. Anybody who knows and who has studied children either as a teacher, as an academic, as an anthropologist, which I am, or you know that you can't, all children are not the same. And why are we putting so much emphasis on testing? As though their little children are indeed different. And that's...
Can everybody stay through dinner? Because this is going to be a whole day conversation.
Well put.
So, can I?
Yes.
When I made my comments, I didn't say standardized test. I said assessment. I need to know if children are learning. So here's a contrast. You all have been kind of given lessons here. I'll give the other side. Is my father was an airplane pilot, and I remember growing up. Twice a year, he went to Denver. I think it was Denver. And he had to go onto a simulator because, something would happen. You better know how to react. And it wasn't based on what he thought was best. It was on the thousands of hours that other pilots had flown, said this is the best action to do at that moment. The reason he could do it is he could assess the system. He knew what was happening. The translation for public education is we need to know how our students are doing. And the fact that, and I can tell you, I have 2 children myself. They are amazingly almost exact opposites. But I still want to know, based on assessments, could be standardized tests, could be reports, could be all sorts of ways. I want to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, because I better be having my teachers understand so they can teach them aligned to their strengths and weaknesses. And as a parent, I want the feedback so I know what I can do and my wife can do to help our children succeed in very different ways. So if we can step aside of no tests or all tests, and I don't think that's what you're saying, if we can ask the question, how do we appropriately assess children in different ways and how they learn? I think that's something that we can learn from the corporations, because, too often we put corporate in, well, they're just creating widgets. It is not that simple in the corporate world, and they think creatively about how do they measure their bottom line, how do they measure performance, and if we could bring that into public education, I think we can lower the tension about too much testing. We can ask the question, what's appropriate to test and assess, both for the kids and the adults?
Sir, back there.
My name is Peter Parker from PSNS 161.
Mr. Greg.
First, I want to thank you, all the corporate partners here on behalf of the public schools and for Pencil for bringing you into our schools. The value added has been incredible, and we really appreciate it, and we couldn't do what we do without your support. My question is really for Dave and Abbe concerning teacher and staff attrition. I'd like to inquire, how does the leadership create systems to keep the bright young people of the so-called millennial generation in a career of education, given the financial and operational paradigm of the present?
Wow. That's also dinner.
That's the weekend, folks.
One of the things that we look at, and I think anybody in business knows, it's not just about salary. There's so many other factors that keep young people, and we look at this as we see young people very different than, in my generation where you stayed at one company, forever. People, they like to move around, but they are looking for different kind of rewards. And it's not just financial. It's about recognition. It's about respect. It's about opportunity to be creative. It's about being in an environment where there's some fearlessness, where you have an opportunity to try something new. So I think those are the principles that we use at our company to retain staff. And I think there's those kinds of opportunities. I know when I was a teacher, when I was given the opportunity, I said, I want to start a drama club. I want to do this. I want to do that. And my administration said, go for it. Those kinds of things kept me energized. And I think, what I see Principal Omar do at Humanities and Arts is very similar. The teacher that wants to have a television production studio with very little resources has the opportunity to do that. The art teacher who wants to have, a different kind of approach. That, I think, is so important and are valuable tools that are beyond financial.
And Peter, I think I'd just pick up on that with within the airline, we pretty much take, of course, we want to attract and retain talent. There's no doubt about that. But we also realize that today, people are working in several different careers, if you will. I mean, this is no longer, right, as we know, the 30 years and here's the ring, right, or the watch, or whatever it might be. So it's as we're seeing this trajectory of talent in our organization, to the extent that somebody then moves into a different career or a different company, or that's okay. Because as long as we're building the bandwidth in the organization behind that leader so that we've got some really nice succession planning that's in place. And again, we're a young company. I think we're putting a lot of effort into that. It gets a little bit more difficult, similar to probably educators, where we also have crew members, our word for employees, that are tied to a seniority system. And as opposed to, the seniority system isn't necessarily merit-based. And a large part of the airline industry that's the way that it's built. Also, again, son of an airline pilot, right? Denver, right? Mm-hmm. Twice a year, that type thing. And and the assessment that didn't, you passed. It wasn't, right? It was a pass or fail. But so when I look at, with the educators as well, my sense is it's really about retaining around a mission. And it really is around the mission in the United States of how do we become or to retain a position of leadership in the world, in competitiveness, innovation, as you hear out of Washington, D.C. And we all know that it starts with the educational system. I mean, that is the raw talent that we're pumping into companies like A&E and JetBlue and others. And so I think my sense is that's the story that needs to continue to be told and repeated so that people say, you know what, it's not about comp and benefits and it's quality of life, it's mission, it's opportunity. That to me is the path forward to really say, this is why I'm going to be a teacher. And this is why I'm going to stay in educating as well, because the country, the city, the community really respects it, needs it, and understands it.
So this is a great question to reinforce this notion, good person, bad system, right? So in education, we lose about 50% of our teachers within the first 5 years. That's a huge loss rate. People come in, they teach for a little bit. And so part of the question is the larger system right now is almost squeezing talent out because we have a seniority base and the new generation, they want to be the CEO tomorrow. They want the leadership opportunities. So while they may not have your job tomorrow, go to Abbe's lesson and make them the head of the drama club. Give them the opportunity to innovate. So there's things like that, but there are constraints that go far beyond where you sit in a school or where the district sits at the state level, right? Yep. Last in, first out, the seniority system. You know, what a young teacher wants now is they don't want to sit in a system where I'm going to get a pretty low starting salary and low increase each year because in 30 or 25 years I'm going to get a nice pension. If there were ways where we could elevate up and take the pension from 30 years from now and move it up so that we could use those resources and pay teachers more when they were delivering more or when they were stepping up and taking on more responsibilities. We just need to think creatively about changing the incentives, the roles, the responsibility. And I think if we don't ask the question of what's our new generation want and what motivates them, we're going to be using the same old kind of incentives that worked maybe 30 years ago, and I think we're going to collapse our system.
Michael, I'm worried the school bell is going to go off. Do we have time for one more question? From this side of the room. Ma'am?
I'm wondering about looking internationally for inspiration about innovation. I wonder if you as corporate leaders look around the world and see things that are working that you might pick up to apply. And whether I know that systems in Finland and Singapore are being held up as models. Do they have things that we can apply in this country, or is it too easy to say or appropriate to say those cultures are so different, it's not going to work here? Just curious whether there are lessons to be learned globally.
So let me start from the education, and I'd love to hear from business. So sure. I strongly believe there's lessons to learn. Anybody that stand up and say we just need to replicate what Finland is doing, I'd ignore them. But if we ask the question of what are the aspects of their system that we can bring in here. So 2 examples. You mentioned Finland and Singapore. Great examples. They elevate up leaders and teachers culturally as really a profound field in their culture, right? Huge respect, huge investment. You know, for leaders in Singapore, one is they get the talent from the top of the college class. We don't. So both teachers and leaders come from the top third of their graduates coming out of college. For the principals, they are some of the best teachers, and then they spend time in developing them. So a lot of times what we do is we say, you've been a great teacher, here are the keys in 15 minutes on leadership, here's your building, go forth and lead. Now, the Leadership Academy in this city and this district's investment on leadership, they started to change that way of doing it, but they invest in the leadership because they believe if you develop talent, the payoff will come in spades. The other piece that they do is they invest heavily on what are the best kind of lesson plans and supports for teachers. They don't spend a lot of time on statewide assessments, but they do assessments and knowing how their kids are doing. And the reason I think there's value in learning this is we get our lunch handed to us in the international comparisons. And what's happening is a lot of other countries are still going up, and the U.S. is kind of flatline or declining in the international comparisons. And I will put one statistic on the table that will be a little frightening, is when we look at the different generations and how much education they have, the kind of a definition of a good growing economy is each successive generation has more education than their parents. There are only 2 countries in the OECD group of countries that have less education than their parents' education. Germany, and some would argue, is the reunification of East and West, and the US. And we're seeing a lot of other countries that are just passing us by in terms of college education, and we need to do more to compete.
Mm-hmm. Sure, we live in a global marketplace. And so within our business, by the way, the first airline customer that traveled was 1914. Fast forward to today, 2011. Aggregated the profits and losses over 97 years in the United States, and thank you, the airline industry hasn't been profitable. So there's a reason to get offshore and see what's happening. The fleets are growing across the world, not in the United States. They're growing in China, India, the Middle East, and other South America, other pockets around the world. So I think learning best practices, our largest shareholder is Lufthansa German Airlines. And this is a decades-old company, but what we have learned from just the human capital, talent management aspect of being over in their centralized university called Zeeheim is unbelievable. Last comment that I would share as well is many times it's not the best practices of the same industry, but other industries. Yeah. And the ability to get out there and try to draw the connection between whatever it might be. It could be something happening on Broadway as opposed to another airline. So I think it really makes sense to benchmark internationally.
I'll just give you one nugget. We're a global company. We're in 150 countries. The one thing that I would say really translates here is that it's about localism. In other words, the way we run the History Channel in England or Germany is very different than we do here. The brands are the same, but you really have to deal with localism. And I believe that's true about schools. I think a school, Rosemary will tell you, in the school at Humanities and Arts in Queens is very different than a school in Iowa. And so there are different principles. And so it's really about understanding your neighborhood, your localism, and how to bring the best attributes of that society that you live in and apply it in your school.
Adam, can I make one last suggestion? So as I'm listening to my colleagues here, I'm hearing about the systems they build, the culture they built, the organization they built. And maybe this is a suggestion to you, Michael, which is I think the principle for the day is very powerful to bring people together, connect and share ideas. I would almost suggest if you could expand it to district administrator for the day. I would love to have Dave or Abbe sitting with the chancellor or the assistant superintendent or the head of the principals association, and have them kind of talk about organizationally where are the lessons that can go. So because the power of what you can bring multiplies beyond just one school. And I just see the value of principle for the day. How do we multiply that?
That's great.
And I know Michael's going to wrap up in a second. One more question? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, taking Sharon's prerogative with just one final observation, if I may. We have many former board members present. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Former board members present and lots of pencil staff, and it's interesting to note that it's not been such a very long time that we could comfortably have this conversation. Why? Because the underpinning of all of what we do is the importance of the mutuality of the relationship. And you heard Dave speak about it because you talked about the things that you took away and what you learned from this. And Abbe, of course, as we call it in the education world, is both actually an insider and an outsider. You were a teacher, you were in a school, so you have also that notion of it. But there has been a lot of years wherein people and principals will know and principals will say, don't you come into my school and tell me what to do. You don't understand. You're different. You don't have the same issues that we do. And the pushback from the principals, and then the notion from many in the private sector, I kind of know things you don't know. So really just a note to say how far this city and urban districts in general have come to lower defenses and to understand that, in fact, there is a tremendous mutuality. And the right people, thank you to Dave, thank you to Abbe, thank you to everybody here, for going into a school and understanding that we're not only building and developing the workforce and the customer and consumer of tomorrow, but what we're really also doing is understanding that we're developing our own abilities and our own capacities with our own organizations and doing both at the same time.
That's great.
I guess just a final note from me. This feels like one of those nifty kind of circle of life moments. Hearing Dave talk about his time at Continental Airlines, working for Gordon Bethune. In the 1990s, I was a reporter at the New York Times. I'm an editor now. But for about 4 years, I covered the airline industry. And it was very fascinating to me because I quickly figured out, all right, fuel prices, you figure out the numbers. But what really struck me was that the airline industry is a really challenging social experiment. And it also struck me early on that it's kind of impossible to be a CEO of an airline because you've got powerful unions, pilots, flight attendants, mechanics. I quickly got the sense they all kind of looked down their noses at each other and thought that they themselves were the most important person to make the airline run. And it was an impossible job to lead an airline effectively, and it was one of those situations where you thought, this just it can't work. It fundamentally can't work. But when early on, this is when I think I came to really appreciate leadership, because it was in these, essentially impossible situations that I saw somebody like Gordon Bethune come into Continental Airlines, which had fast become sort of the punchline on late night shows for any airline joke. It had been through bankruptcy. The people were really beaten down. And he lifted the airline up. He pulled everybody together. He created a sense of mission. He said, these are the few things that we're all going to focus on. And if we do these things, we're going to start cutting checks to everybody at the airline to reward them for on-time performance, lost baggage improvement. So it can be done. And I do think there are some parallels, what I said earlier on. You all have incredibly challenging jobs because, stakeholders, customers, clients, you've got students, parents, taxpayers, the board members, you've got the teachers you have to look after. So I do respect and admire and appreciate the challenge you're facing, but it can be done, and a lot of you are doing it, and I think all of us up here sit in admiration of you. So thank you for your efforts.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well said.
So just in closing, of course, an extra thank you to Adam and Abby and Dave and Richard for a really terrific conversation that we could see by the hands could have gone on through dinner and through the weekend. So really, thank you very much. I just wanted to make a couple of points. Many of you in the room, most of you in the room are either principals or already pencil partners. If you're not, please take the flyer, take a look, because all of you can be doing the amazing work that Abby and Dave are doing with their schools, and we hope you'll get involved. Also on your table, as I mentioned before, help us develop the future leaders. Think about our Pencil Fellows internship program. It's really a really amazing opportunity. I want to again thank Time Warner for providing us with this really amazing space. Thank you to Dan and Lisa and Jeannie. I want to thank all of you for being here. Two things coming up. There was references to Finland. One of the most important players in the Finland education system, a guy named Pasi Salzberg, will be speaking at a setting like this in September. So check your email. We'll be letting you know about that. And if you want to celebrate with us all the incredible work that our partnerships are doing in hundreds of schools throughout the city, keep an eye on your email for our year-end celebration on June 15th. Until then, I'm going to be thinking about the fact that, and I'm not sure if I had the advantage or the disadvantage, but I'm the only, quote, CEO here whose entire staff was in the room to hear. So now they're going to be thinking, you're not doing that, you're not doing that, you're not doing that. So I have that extra challenge. But thank you to all of you for being here, and thanks again to all of you for participating.